Объединенных Наций. Реализация этих
So,
мероприятий
implementation of those activities for all the countries is a very important goal. What are we talking about? That's about comprehensive development of world countries, and we're talking about Russia right now and about strategic goals of our country and the extent of their correlation with sustainable development goals of the United Nations. And we need to say that there are 17 SDGs, and we have national projects, strategic programs, documents which imply movement in certain directions with implementation of those goals. And today we will estimate to what extent the way to those goals will be easy or difficult, what is to be done to streamline relations between government authorities, business, society, and first and foremost, find this appropriate correlation between federal and local authorities which ought to implement all the goals. I would introduce the participants of our TV session, and it is an appropriate thing to say, in this case, program from left to right. Alexei Kudrin, Chairman of Accounts Chamber of the Russian Federation. Good afternoon. Maxim Reshetnikov, Minister of Economic Development of the Russian Federation. Valery Falkov, Minister of Science and Higher Education of the Russian Federation. And we will also have participants joining online. Evgeny Dietrich, Minister of Transport of the Russian Federation. I hope he hears us. Dmitry Konov, Chairman of the Board of Sibur Holding, and Sergei Morozov, who will join us a bit later, Governor of Ulyanovsk region. So we will have a notion what is to be done at the regions, in the regions, what is being done and what happens there in terms of the implementation of those long-term goals. I will ask the first question to Mr. Reshetnikov, as Minister of Economic Development is preparing reviews of how we are moving to the goals which are specified with the abbreviation SDG, which is professionally established, but I think it is something new for our audience. So Sustainable Development Goals then. To what extent is it correlating with our strategic documents, and to what extent everything which happens now, the second wave of the pandemic or the continuation of the first one, is able to bring forward amendments in the programs and goals we have set forward? So 2 questions. The first one, to what extent our system of goal setting and goals, all Russian goals which have been set according to the presidential decree 474 comply with SDGs, and we need to say that our national goals take essential from SDGs, what is crucial and relevant for our country now, because all in all, if we talk about SDGs, there are 17 main goals which are divided into 169 goals and tasks, and it's a unified system of goal setting for developing countries and for developed countries. Of course, there are such goals as, for instance, elimination of child labor or elimination of poverty, which accounts for $1 per day. That level of poverty, of course, such goals, or for instance, hunger and starvation in many countries. So these are not relevant for our country, but if we change the level of poverty, of course, combat against poverty is one of the main goals of our country in the general sense of the word. So the goal system which has been proposed and endorsed by the decree takes everything from the all the essential parts from SDGs. And the second part, when we will be adopting all our state program system to the goals of the national program, of course, we will be resolving goals of lower levels in terms of SDGs, because some goals will be relevant or crucial. Maybe they will not be corresponding completely with the national goals. Maybe we will be adding something together with different authorities and bodies, and we have special attention to SDGs, and It has been so strong for the first time this year, and we have prepared the plan for SDGs implementation, and we have introduced it in the UN as well, and now we need to pass it to all the authorities, to all the officials of all the levels in terms of the international goal setting system, in addition to what has been set in Russia this year. If we talk about current situation, to what extent current situation is changing this agenda, we need to understand that something we have faced is a deviation from the trajectory, but this is a temporary deviation, first and foremost, and secondly, it is significant but not that profound as it had seemed in April or May, and of course we will be coming back to that development trajectory in the sense of the word, in updated sense of the word, but of course, first and foremost, conditions will be a bit different because pandemic and current situation is set in some new realities, for instance, remote mode of work, changes in labor markets and other markets, changes in consumer preferences of people, changing of attitude to tourism, to inner tourism, domestic tourism, and some experts warn that we will see changes to investment, that we will be able to develop with a low investment base, possibly because it has given impetus to the so-called sharing economy when one and the same capacities are being used. So it's a kind of an impetus. So the situation has accelerated a lot of processes, and maybe we haven't understood or realized yet what current conditions are, and that's up to the expert community to summarize the experience which is being accumulated, and that's a large scope of work for the government, for the Ministry of Economy and Economic Development, which is being implemented, and it is about adopting our managerial system of state programs, national programs to the new agenda and new conditions which have emerged. And so are we to catch up or just to have some reforms in place, some slight adjustments? No, it's not about catching up. It's not an attempt to catch up. It's an attempt to perceive, to realize, and maybe to act in advance sometimes. Okay, Mr. Kudrin, our strategic documents are quite disintegrated because we have strategies in separate directions, but UN is providing a comprehensive program. On the one hand, it's comprehensive, but on the other hand, these are good general words, and you can see that on the UN website, because any country can choose the set of these goals and devise different strategies, general or more detailed ones. And is our strategy covering all those goals? To what extent do we correspond with the goals which are facing the country, which are posed by UN? Thank you. Today we are present at the strategic forum, and together with relevant issues of healthcare and pandemic, we discuss strategic issues as well, because in my view, qualitative strategic planning and strategic priorities account for 50% of success of appropriate resources distribution and allocation and solution of different goals. So today, in spite of the acute situation, we are to remember about that and to keep to the pace of strategic goals and tasks, because in summer, for instance, the pandemic hadn't been over, and the president has specified the goals because they were set 2 years ago, and he brought forward amendments into the approaches basing on the goal of concentrating on most important things. We used to have 9 goals, now we have 5. They have become more comprehensive. And the second point is
по решению ООН являются организациями, которые осуществляют мониторинг в своих странах.
Supreme audit institutions and accounts chambers, one of them, are providing for sustainable goals achievement using its own tools. So we have had a public introduction of the monitoring by the accounts chamber, which has introduced main priorities of Russia working with SDG and main tools of Russia used by Russia in that scope. And all the 17 goals, all our national goals, national projects, state programs, development strategies adopted by our country cover all those 17 goals. Another point is that we sometimes see lack of involvement in active implementation of some goals, weak coordination of ministries and authorities in terms of achieving those goals. For instance, 25% of those indicators of SDGs are not distributed among ministries and departments. This topic had been in the background till recent times because we have been moving towards our own goals, but it's very important to remember about SDGs because why all the countries have agreed on them and signed the document. It's a kind of an international liability and activity because for the first time we have seen new opportunity of synergy for activities of different countries to pass best practices and experience from developed countries in developing and to fulfill humanitarian mission of all children having access to school education in developing countries, for vaccines coming to those countries even when they are not able to procure them, to have more people, to have access for more people in terms of electricity. And as had been said, a bit more than $1 per day. That's a criteria of poverty which exists in the world. And of course, we have resolved that problem long time ago. This extreme poverty has been overcome. But today, in the beginning of the pandemic, 8.2% of the world population had fewer than $1 per day. That's extreme poverty. And now, during the pandemic, this indicator has increased up to 8.8% of world population. Of course, the pandemic has brought forward its own amendments and problems. For instance, 26 UN countries haven't received medication because of limitations in terms of movements and transportations between countries. Routes were blocked, so not all children have an opportunity of remote education. Not everyone has computers or laptops to listen to the lectures in remote mode. So the pandemic has brought forward its amendments, and of course the world is thinking how to devise those new mechanisms and to overcome those difficulties. And in this sense of the word, coming back to Russia, I would like to say that we ought to increase the quality of strategic planning. That's the goal for the Ministry of Economic Development. And as far as I know, the government of the Russian Federation is paying more attention to the issue of state governance and planning. Each goal is being digitalized. We need to get precise data how this process is being developed in the sphere where the goal has been set. And our previous state programs and some our national projects didn't have that all the time. And if you don't know how processes are going on, it's difficult to make some managerial decisions. So management process is being transformed. We haven't seen all the details. Even specified national projects ought to be introduced in the nearest future, in the nearest days, and we will see them, how they are amended, taking into account new goals which were set in summer by the president. The government has been working all those months, and now we have a new question in terms of the quality of state programs, because we have national projects and they are composed by federal projects and they're part of state programs in turn, and this comprehensive hierarchy is not efficient all the time from the standpoint of permanent focusing on those important goals. Today we have a dispute how to change state programs which have been existent for many years So how can we bring forward new chains of national projects, how to do that in a more efficient way? And I think that state programs need to be revised and reviewed. State programs, first and foremost, have a lot of indicators, and state programs have different levels of goals and indicators, and they are not balanced all the time. And the most important thing that there are plenty of them. There are the so-called lower level indicators, and that's the overall system of administrative indicators and goals, which is quite frequently hard to be managed. And we need to have those programs more laconic and clear-cut, not only to managers or officials. And we have a problem that programs are not connected with project decisions all the time. We try to involve that, but that's an important goal. There is a goal which is to be achieved, and when it is achieved, it is finalized, and we create a new project. And this project approach is being implemented, and state programs have proved to be a bit out of date for the new kind of dynamic management of reaching and achieving goals. And we need to devise projects and processes are being managed a bit differently. Maybe national project and federal projects correspond more with the project approach, because we use the old framework to introduce partially new approaches. And it seems to me that those state programs need to be reviewed. We not to reject them completely, but to improve and enhance them significantly, and such steps are to be made. And as I have said, we also need coordination between ministries and agencies. We are not to establish the new contour of SDGs management, because we really cover all of them. And those priorities are to be managed properly and monitored properly. For us to remember that today any development is a comprehensive one, and we can't say that infrastructure is more important than education, or education is more important than environment. Today we have shifted to the new quality of state development. Only altogether education, ecology, infrastructure, and others will give this new effect, and that's the essence of SDGs. Provide a new paradigm for the world of the development in their own countries and coordination between countries. Yeah, I would like to add a bit to what Mr. Kidron has said, because we have been discussing that a lot. The main mechanism of implementation of national goals is about the unified plan of national goals achievement. We are devising that, elaborating on it, and it will become a strategy of goal achievement and a kind of bridge between all national goals, for instance, SDGs, practically, and our own activities and programs and projects. And it will embrace all the factor system and logics of achievement. And Mr. Kudrin has correctly said that in compliance with the unified plan and detailization of the goals, we will be focusing our programs further. And I completely agree with him that refusal is not the case, because there had been a proposal, let's reject all the programs and invent something new, but we will just lose time and it won't be efficient. We need to significantly reconsider and review those programs. And so that's the ratio of process and project approach is the discussion which has been going on for a long time. And why are those national projects good? Because they're project type, they are focused in time, they have detailed goals, and we have experience accumulated in the run of 2 years, which is to be transferred into state programs for them to be even more focused. And of course, we can't refuse from process thanks, because it is fulfillment of our liabilities, like teaching, providing medical treatment, and so on and so forth. And we need to have qualitative indicators of accessibility or perception by the society. Yesterday, during the meeting with State Duma, we have heard an idea that we need to have more social parameters and indicators involved in what Mr. Goodrin has said, kind of polar questioning. That's a feedback with those who really take part in that, who really take part in that or receive those services, and when is this strategic plan to emerge?
Президенту до 30 октября.
It is to be introduced till the 30th of October to the president, till the end of this week. And we have been discussing it actively this week, and final amendments are being brought forward by the government, and it will be introduced to the president. Okay, that's clear. And Mr. Kudrin has said that any directions are not to be highlighted, but I would argue, because world trends are clear: ecology, science, and everything which is connected with human capital. And Mr. Kudrin has been talking about that constantly, because the 17 parameters are important. But for instance, combat against poverty is not completely our story. Of course, revenues are decreasing, but still not in the scope, because, for instance, ecology or education maybe are more trendy. And so main trends are clear. How do they correlate with national programs? That's the first question. And the second question, we have the new investment cycle till 2030. Aren't we to lose the pace in terms of the trends which are set by the Western countries? Of course, we set the goal of enhancing our pace, not to lose it. And in terms of program documents, we are backed up by the strategy of technological development, and it has been a fundamental document for 3 years, which had been written in the logics of major challenges, which are correlated in turn with SDGs. For instance, comprehensive manner is being present, and we have science and technological paradigm and national projects, science and education, which is correlated with higher education. And what we have proposed, we still get support on the level of expert community, and we will be calculating that on all other levels. And we suggested that we should brought forward amendments to the national project science to change the ideology and to call it science and universities, and to bring forward several important amendments. First and foremost, there are instruments which allow us to have regions involved into scientific and technological development. That's one of the goals we face as the government, set directly by the president of the Russian Federation. It is a comprehensive goal for all the levels of education. The second achievement is connected with the fact that universities are closely correlated with science, and they are to develop, and scientific institutions are to be developed in close integration with universities, because in the modern world, all major scientific research and large-scale projects are implemented not by one scientific team or not by one scientist. Of course, we can't diminish the role of personality in history, but usually a lot of effort is needed. And if we concentrate on breakthrough directions, we create conditions within the framework of the new national project via R&D centers, for instance, for genetic technologies, mathematic technologies. And now we launch another program, to a large extent oriented at universities. That's the program of strategic and academic leadership. And we had set the goal that in the field of higher education, as well as in the field of science, we are to have long-term agenda, long planning horizon, at least till 2030. Since June, we have been discussing this program. It will be one of the key parts of the new national project. The goals have been defined, and the goal is quite complicated: to make our universities research centers. And if we talk about specific points, we need to advance in science and research in higher education. Today we rank 17th, and we have the goal of entering top 10 world countries in the sense of the word. We will continue discussing, and we will have our online guests joining us. We will have 2-minute break. So,
Общий 11.
Ну что ж, продолжаем разговор, как
and so we
обеспечить.
continue our talk, how to provide sustainable development in the area of uncertainty, and that's the talk about sustainable development goals and long-term trends which ought to be tested in the nearest future. Till 2030, we need to reach certain goals in the number of directions, and I would like to have Minister of Transport of the Russian Federation join us via online, Evgeny Dietrich. So, good afternoon, dear friends. I'm very happy to join you at the Strategic Forum. I would like to ask you the following. Infrastructure is a direction which has been actively discussed, and there are some strategic documents which imply certain activities to reach different goals and results. And to what extent is something which is being planned within infrastructural projects corresponding with the goals which have been set till 2030, both by UN and by our own strategic documents? Well, thank you, colleagues, and I would like, in fact, join the discussion which has been conducted before me by my colleagues. We do try to do everything in terms of transport infrastructure to reform national projects for the scope of SDGs. And as it has been correctly mentioned by Mr. Kudrin, SDGs defined and specified by the President of the Russian Federation this year are aimed at, first and foremost, the final result for each person, and work which is being carried out at the government to reach those goals is behind the scenes. Maybe it is not visible all the time directly, but nevertheless, national projects have been formulated to provide for the achievement of final goals. What do I mean? First and foremost, we see clearly now that country needs the development of transport infrastructure, and this transport infrastructure is first and foremost about global interconnectivity of our country, huge country, and opportunities to transport cargo with economic efficiency across our territory to provide for economy needs of our people involving prices and tax revenues. Transport infrastructure is about an opportunity to move across the country for people, and it is connected with the fact that people can travel and have labor migration, and transport infrastructure is also about development of city agglomerations, urban development, public spaces development, public transport development, opportunity to move across cities. And that's one of the goals which is clearly emphasized in July presidential decree. And I would like to add that transport infrastructure for us today is also about employment issues, because currently at least 4.5 million people are working in transport field, and according to different expert estimates, it's an opportunity to find employment for 4 times as many people if we talk about related fields. And it is not one of the simplest goals, but very important for transport infrastructure, that safety and security. That's one of the goals we have ahead of us. And in the run of recent 10 years, we have seen a twofold decrease of mortality in traffic accidents, road accidents. Since 2012 till 2018, this indicator has decreased by 1/3, and we have managed to save 10,000 human lives during this period. And that's actually a population of a small town, equal to the population of a small town, and we are trying to resolve that within the framework of national projects. I would like to say a couple of words what we see in terms of our breakthrough opportunities relating to infrastructure. If we have a look at road construction, we have calculated in 2011 we were spending approximately 250 billion rubles a year for road construction, and in 2012 that accounted for approximately 400 billion rubles. And Mr. Kudrin can be a bit skeptical about those figures, because we are really lagging behind our foreign partners in terms of the percentage from the GDP, which is allocated for infrastructure, but still that's an increase. And I'd like to say that during pandemic, when country was needing the drivers and we all wanted to have something to stick to overcome the pandemic, we managed to increase the volumes of transport construction. For instance, in terms of road construction, we had 600 billion rubles in 2020 in comparison to 400 billion rubles we had in 2019. And 100 billion rubles were allocated to different regions for road construction according to the national project of safe and secure roads. That's also about the increase of work scope in this sector of work. And what's important, we have managed from the beginning in the discussion of our colleagues from the Ministry of Labor to persuade them that transport construction, any transport construction, is today about a continuous cycle. It can't be stopped. It can't be limited by pandemic restrictions, and those construction sites haven't been stopped. And that gave us an opportunity to say today that transport infrastructure ceases to be an element, economic binding element, because we see that by 2024, 2030, we will have 16,000 kilometers of roads renovated and modernized every year, and 2,000 kilometers of new roads constructed, and we would like to reach the new scope of growth. And within the framework of national projects, we see right now we have a very important goal connected with the formation of road network. Approximately 170,000 kilometers are to be formed by 2030, and if we had been renovating federal highways, we are to get involved in the updates of regional ones, and we need to define main highways to deliver cargoes, to account for main passenger flows, and these highways involve both regional and federal, and they are to be brought in order. And once again, to conclude, I'd like to say that in all this year has been a breakthrough one for transport sector. We have made a lot of decision to increase our financing, and this year we have started a large-scale national construction site, Moskva-Kazan, corridor between Europe and China, and we will also finalize ring road construction in the Moscow region, and we have started active work in the regions. These are huge perspectives for both who work on those construction site and for those who will be using those roads in the future. I have some statistics in terms of the development of our foreign partners. Just to continue the discussion, in 2008 in China, when China was emerging out of crisis, it has allocated approximately 12% of GDP for transport and infrastructure development, together with ecology projects and public utilities projects, and that enabled them to have the GDP growth of approximately 9% in 2012. India has approximately $13 billion in 2008, thanks to international obligations and loans, and they were afforded to preferential credits for infrastructure with PPP involvement, and they also had the growth of approximately 9% of GDP. And now, when a lot of countries are overcoming the pandemic, allocating investment for infrastructure, China is allocating approximately $1 trillion for infrastructure and infrastructural projects. Brazil is allocating 5 trillion for infrastructural projects, because a lot of countries see infrastructure as the source for future growth, and we are not lagging behind in the sense of the word. So, Mr. Dietrich, do I understand you correctly that you support further increase of that sector, or do we have that amount of resources we're able to process? Well, today, if we have a look at financing, further financing of national projects and national project, a road project and main infrastructure comprehensive plan, traditionally it is constructed according to the staircase or ladder principle. The ones who have worked with the budget know that it's a traditional model which is providing for gradual growth, and in the run of this time, road construction has increased its capacities. Now we're able to manage construction sites, and we learn how to do that. Because it's not about streamlining our projects and to simplify our accountability and to bring forward another procedures. We also need to have streamlining of processes in general, because this year, as it was initiated by the government, and this year was a breakthrough for our work, we adopted a law which implies a number of innovations and facilitations in road construction, and we opt for gradual increase of investment volume in infrastructure, not only to have money pushing us forward, but also our production capacities not lagging behind. It's very important because in a longer term, till 2024, 2030, constructors, potential entrepreneurs in the field of road construction, transport construction, see their perspectives, because only under those conditions they will have an opportunity to procure equipment, to teach and train people, to invest in the future, to enhance their competences. Only under that conditions we will have growth perspectives. Thank you very much, Mr. Dietrich. Minister of Transport of the Russian Federation joined us online.
Мы, в принципе, вот эту дискуссию о
So,
необходимости...
Mr. Kudrin, the discussion on the need to increase infrastructural cost has been carried out in the run of recent 10 years, and economists are divided into two groups. And some tend to say that there is a basic level of inflation, and others tend to say that it had to be done earlier. So what am I talking about? The goals which are offered by the UN are good, of course, but we understand that in 1990s we were lagging behind due to objective reasons because the country was changing. And maybe now, as Alice used to say, we need to keep running very fast to stay in one location, to stay in one place. So maybe we do have to do that more intensively than it had been done. Well, as I had said, strategic planning is about 50% of success in terms of qualitative strategic planning and appropriate priorities. Of course, this first goal is also involving the structure of our investment, what is to be paid more attention to. The second point, part of success, is how to do that and what are the drivers of economy at the moment. And I wanted to say that one of the key goals we have is about the increase of financing, partially thanks to redistribution and relocation of resources. We are not to increase taxes, we can get away without it, approximately after last specification of taxes, and we need the redistribution in three directions: education and healthcare. That's what forms human capital and new opportunities for any country. So feedback from a human being is more than from any field, investment from any field, even in oil production and extraction. So human capacities is about new technologies which improve labor productivity, and it will yield more than development of traditional spheres. And the second point, besides education and healthcare, is infrastructure, really. And indeed, first and foremost, as Mr. Dietrich has said, infrastructure has its role, and first and foremost, it is changing the quality of communication inside the country, in particular from the standpoint of cargo, transportation, passenger flows, people migration inside of the country, development of different territories, interconnection of territories, underdeveloped territories with the developed ones. So that's crucial. And when we had been planning that at the Strategic Planning Center, one of the indicators to set was the speed and the velocity of a human being to get from periphery, from some small village to regional outpatient clinics or to some regional center. So this migration is very important. Is a very important element of the dynamics of the overall economy. For people to have choice, and as I had said, for transport it's about cost reduction because we have high transport expenditures in cargoes and products in comparison to other countries, also due to the size of our territory, but also to the weak level of infrastructure development. So this point is having some hidden effect on the development of the field. So both education, healthcare, and infrastructure need higher costs, 1.5 or 2 times higher. And I can talk about all the directions, but we unfortunately partially, from the standpoint of education, do understand that we spend 3.8 to 3.7% of GDP, and leading countries have the goal of having 5% allocated for that, and the most advanced spend 7-8% of GDP. They are investing that in a human being to get a new kind of specialist, competent, able to work on a new type of equipment, because without that, new kinds of production won't be in place. There will be no human resources to create them. The same thing is true for healthcare. We invest less than 4% of GDP in that, and we ought to increase that up to the level of 7-8%, and the same is true for infrastructure. But the question is where to get those resources from, which fields are other resources to be extracted from if we do not increase taxes. So it's increase of loans. So increase by 1 trillion rubles in terms of loans. And we will preserve high level of loans next year to support those expenditures. It's about decrease of dotations to state companies and subsidies for those which are unevenly distributed. Well, subsidies are quite often unevenly distributed among enterprises which decrease competitive equality. So it's better to do that in infrastructure, which creates general capacities. And the last thing about infrastructure, of course, infrastructure has a feedback in economy, but not promptly. It is about longer term perspectives, and it is not about boom or skyrocketing growth. It is about investment in the future, which is longer term, but it is to be in place, because after that, if we don't have that, it turns out that it is something which impedes the economic growth. So the structure of budget costs and expenditures is something to work over in a profound manner. And you know my stance. Well, the foundation of national well-being can have high costs and or expenditures, but now we have delayed this discussion because the new budget project has been introduced and all the decisions have been made. So, Mr. Reshetnikov, do you agree? Do we have enough resources? Do we need to take risks to reach those goals? From the standpoint of finance, well, I think there is no such situation when all the resources are sufficient. You lack something all the time, but first and foremost, the budget process had been very tough, and our main concern of the Ministry of Economic Development is that We have mitigated our budgetary policy this year significantly, and we had the task of coming back to the budgetary rules in connection with the situation that 2021 could be very difficult, and if we were shifting rapidly to new rules, we would face a lot of problems because all budget articles are protected, and that balancing would be done at the expense of other projects like road construction and infrastructure development, and we were looking for compromise, and I think we have found a solution which will help us preserve development in development next year as well, taking into account the fact that this year we had a loan program adopted. We will have reserves. Traditionally, some budget items are underfulfilled because there are some reserves for some social payments or allowances, but those reserves maybe not that profound, but still they can act as a buffer for implementation of goals next year, and we will be able to overcome those fluctuations in the budget. We will be able to mitigate them, and we will be able to have them supporting our economic growth or maybe intensifying it. And the second point is that this year we have launched a new mechanism of the protection of capital investment, and there is a point there that investors will be able to invest into infrastructure. They will be able to invest their funds, which will be reimbursed from budgetary funds thanks to new taxes which are received from the implementation of new projects. That's a new tool which will enable us in 2021, 2022 to have certain growth. And we are talking about efficiency issues all the time. What we discuss with Mr. Kudrin all the time, we need to invest not only in the most efficient projects, but we need to deal with all the directions of budgetary expenditures, because quite frequently not everything is streamlined, and we need to increase this efficiency. Maybe it gives not a huge money, but still it provides for balancing budgetary sphere for investment in hospitals, schools, and so on. So we need to have a comprehensive approach. So we have another break for 2 minutes, and then we will come back. So we continue our discussion on sustainable development goals and how to provide sustainable development in this era of uncertainty. And now we will talk to that with major business. Dmitry Konov, chairman of the board of Sibur Holding, joining us online. Good afternoon once again. How can major business help us in achieving goals we have set ourselves, and UN has adopted that in the form of SDGs? And do we need now, I beg your pardon for such a comparison, something of a new public agreement between business, power, and society? You know, if we have a look at SDGs at all, the 17, they are for everything good against everything bad at first sight. But if we dive into details, we understand that to a large extent they define, both for states and business, key restrictions or points in terms of development or movement forward. And for Sibur, which is having its own sustainable development strategy until 2025, and which has become a constituent part of our business, our investment decisions are taken into account with those SDGs, and they involve our HR policies and solutions in terms of key technologies we are moving to and we are financing, and to some extent in terms of operational activities and development of our new capacities and investment projects. And in this sense of the word, there is a triangle between society, business, and state, which is not so obvious. For instance, if we talk about combating poverty, it is not that relevant for us. Maybe we can control that only for our 20,000 employees and their family members. But if we talk about climate agenda and combat against climate changes, we can have more correlation in place. But all in all that scope of work and how we can move and how state is moving, that's a triangle between us, state as a regulator, and society, represented by our employees and those who are living in regions we are working in. So if we have a look at the public covenant, then we will understand that companies are dependent significantly from clients, customers, and from relations with employees and regulators and rules of the game, which we do have, which are introduced. And in this sense of the word, we can't ignore anything, and we need to take that into account, and we need to have that in our plans. And if we talk about history, for instance, there are SDGs expressed via another abbreviation, ESG, Environment, Social and Government. And if we think about that, then first part of 2000s, when we had an active growth of Russian economy and investment growth into Russian economy, one of the factors, not a contributing factor, but one of the factors was the rapid growth of governance, G letter, in Russian companies, transparency and clear-cut manner of business operation. Now we are not able to move forward without clear-cut compliance and conscious agenda in the social part, and that's about social covenant, which is having more influence not only on financial indicators, but on who works at our company, what do we do for personnel development, and how we treat our employees and the communities which surround us, municipalities and country in general. And another thing we have been discussing today relating environment in two parts. I have heard the discussion recently, climate, which is being physical and chemical, to what extent air and water is comfortable in proximity to our enterprises, and we are paying attention to that via investment and support of best available technologies in production, and we have been actively supporting physical climate as well, apart from chemical climate, because it is about emissions, a carbon agenda, and all the restrictions connected with that. Yeah, that's very precise. So my next question is to Mr. Falkov. Environmental track, as it is said now, is to become one of the main ones. In dispute between medicine and ecology, it seems to me that ecology will become more trendy, even if we have a look at election campaign of American candidates, if we have a look at what Europe is doing, not all the countries, but the major part, we see that we are not to lag behind them. Do we have any opportunities here? Are we talking about a huge financing, or about what? And how can we understand the consequences? If we lag behind, what are the threats from the standpoint of SDGs, for instance? So if you don't understand the agenda, if you don't move within the framework of the agenda, you lag behind, but we understand the agenda. I mean, global climate or environmental agenda, as you have said. And the worst side of the medal is human life, because ecology environment is directly connected with lives of people, how they live, where they live, and it is connected with the comprehensive manner, as it has been said. It's about food, safety and security. It's also about infrastructure and construction, because that's a simple question. If we don't deal with climate agenda and ecology in the far north, then we do understand that our infrastructure is posed to huge risks, because new construction technologies are needed, because there are changes in soil composition in the far north, and it is about fundamental science and research, and these are the goals we set forward. And now within the framework of the national project science, we see this, we have the selection of scientific and R&D centers, and one will be dedicated only to the Arctic topic. Within the framework of the same problematics we see resource-intensive directions, but I would like to point out that we understand that, we feel that, and we have been working within the many years, and it will be one of the priorities. For instance, that's about the research of maritime and ocean expeditions. We have started the construction of two new vessels till 2024. That will be the modernization of our scientific R&D fleet. And that's one of the problem spots, but without presence in the world ocean, without research of coastal seas, and without the presence in the world ocean, it's impossible to talk about full-fledged presence of Russia in this global agenda. And of course, there is a convergence of different sciences, natural sciences, and here we work closely with our colleagues from the Ministry of Economic Development. That's about carbon balance, carbon agenda, to understand how the volume of greenhouse gases we produce and the volume we can dispose of, taking into account our landscape peculiar traits, our territories, how we can manage that via forestry or agriculture, and that's a significant goal for Russian science as the part of international science. We do understand that, and those goals have been formed, and activities to solve such goals, including SDGs, are embedded in the national project science or science and universities. Well, I suggest that we should address regions. We have Sergei Morozov, governor of Ulyanovsk region, joining us online. So if you hear us. So my question is simple in terms of the resources, different resources, because regions are points of growth, and we have been talking about that recently. Financial and managerial resources are questions which are asked all the time in such situations. Do we have everything in sufficient volume? Also within the framework of SDGs, to what extent a regional agenda can be helpful to us? Thank you very much. I would like to thank you sincerely for a very interesting discussion. In the run of many years, I have been taking part in this forum, and I would like to say and to support my colleagues that SDGs are very important for any region, and I think that for municipalities as well. And I'm ready to talk about that in a competent manner, because we have done even more, because we're talking not only about the strategies connected with SDGs, but we also have municipalities involved in the process. And moreover, each municipality had a profound analysis of all the problems of the quality of life. They're unique to a large extent. For instance, some people are concerned by the quality of drinking water, some are connected with others. So we want them to be submerged not only for SDGs, but we would like to have a kind of a rating of life quality. And we have organized the first competition, first bidding for the projects enhancing the quality of life. And we all ought to think about having something similar, not on the municipality level, but on the regional level, all Russian level. And coming back to your question, I can say that we really do have a lot. We have a streamlined system of business support, and we have a lot of interesting ideas devised on the federal level, which have been implemented in the regions. For instance, information exchange platform establishment, or preferential conditions for procurement, or digitalization process we have been talking a lot about. Of course, we need to have devised and elaborate regional institutional politics, but I'm sure that most part of regions has them. We have development corporations and agencies, and we have created a qualitative work for entrepreneurship. And today in our region, we do understand that we need to move forward actively, and we decided to create public movement for business, to support business, which will make us stronger undoubtedly. And if we talk about additional resources, we need to understand what has to be done, not only to constitute special economic zones or advanced development territories or industrial parks. We ought to think what is needed from the standpoint of finances. This year, our region, as lots of regions under the conditions, under tough and unconditional conditions connected with COVID, we had to revise our forecasts and to decrease revenues expectations. And once again, we were all in the same situation. And it was great to hear that the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation was to provide dotations to support regions worth of 2.3 billion rubles. And I would like to say that it's very good that it's not only about the Ministry of Finance, but also the government of the Russian Federation which has supported us in that. For instance, the government of the region will have today an opportunity to eliminate the restrictions in terms of the attracting the loans which are scrutinized and which are stipulated in the agreement. And it will give us an opportunity to forward and to allocate funds which are sourced from investment projects, and we will have new incentives working which will help us to write off debts, loan debts, and that's a project we have been fighting for, and now we have that. And another resource for the development is private-public partnership. We have 22 projects in our portfolio currently worth of more than 30 billion rubles. And I hope that in terms of interaction with the federal center, we will be able in the nearest future to actively develop sustainable development goals of the region in the number of directions. If we talk about additional incentives in terms of finance, so literally there are 2 points. I think we need to clearly follow reimbursement principle of local budgets when the federal center is making decisions on the reduction of its own revenues. We have been talking about that a lot, and I think that Mr. Reshetnikov, who had been working as a governor previously, would be able to take that in consideration. And another point is connected with treasury loan. We have been discussing that with Mr. Artuhin, and we have managed to come to an agreement in general terms. Because currently there are problems with the terms to pay it off. And the mechanism is not that flexible from the standpoint of partial reimbursement or partial cancellation of debt, so cancellation of loans. So during strategic planning and discussion, we will be able to resolve this problem as well. And all in all, to actively develop, we have a lot, if not everything, which we can be proud of. Well, that's quite optimistic. Thank you very much, Sergei Morozov, governor of Ulyanovsk region. And to conclude, I would like to ask Mr. Reshetnikov how roles are to be distributed in terms of the achievement of the sustainable development goals, if we talk about internal strategic goals between state, business, and society in a nutshell. If we talk about colleagues from regions, so national goals can't be achieved without active participation of regions and municipalities. Now, out of 28 target indicators of our national goals, 22 are directly connected with regions. So each region has its own set of goals stipulated. So, of course, we can't say that some goals don't have any regional dimension. No, but such goals have complicated nature and a lot of constituent parts. So it's very important to involve those regions from the standpoint of achieving national goals. And second, it's very important to provide flexibility to them and to provide predictable, clear conditions, the same way we do for business, because we talk about providing business with stable conditions and clear conditions. It's also important for the regions, because they are comprehensive constituent units with their goals, with their tasks and challenges, and it is important to provide them with continuous rules of the game, stable rules of the game, and that's how we will incentivize everyone to work in a systemic long-term manner for the development of all Russian goals, national goals we have been talking about today. Thank you so much. I would like to thank all the participants of the discussion. Unfortunately, we are run of time, and strategic development is something which has to be discussed in the nearest future. Sustainable development in the era of uncertainty.
Роспотребнадзор опубликовал постановление